Welcome to 7 Days of English Channel.
Hi there. I'm really glad you're here. Today, I want to share a story that's close to the heart about losing everything you thought defined you and somehow finding something even better. You're going to meet Daniel Okafor, a Nigerian-American software engineer who built his identity around success in the tech world, until the day it all came crashing down. Laid off, lost, back in his hometown in North Carolina, helping his aging parents and wondering who he is without the job title. Daniel stumbles into a struggling community garden, and what happens next will surprise you. It's not just about dirt and vegetables. It's about letting go of ego, planting new roots, and realizing that maybe, just maybe, starting over isn't the end. It's the beginning. So, settle in. This one's for anyone standing at a crossroads, wondering what comes next.
I'll never forget the morning I got that email telling me my tech career was over, or at least put on indefinite hold. It was a Tuesday in April. I was 36 years old, a Nigerian, American with an engineering degree and a head full of code. I'm not proud of it, but I used to believe my worth was measured by how fast I could solve a puzzle or how many lines of code I could write. That's just how I saw myself, and everyone around me saw it too, as if being Daniel Okafor, the Silicon Valley software guy, was all I had. But on that Tuesday, I got the dreaded message. Due to corporate downsizing, your position is eliminated. Bam. Just like that, my title, my project, my whole career vanished into thin air. I stared at that email on my screen for a long moment, heart pounding in disbelief. I felt like someone had yanked the rug out from under me. My brain scrambled for answers. Was it an April Fool's joke, or maybe some HR typo? No, the email had my name, my department, the dates. This was real. By late afternoon, I found myself standing on the sidewalk outside the glassy office tower where I'd been an engineer. A half-packed cardboard box in my hands carried the tokens of my life: family photos, a couple of novelty coffee mugs, that bobblehead lady from my desk nodding every time I spoke, and a faded, hooded sweatshirt from the company meetup last year. 36 years old and clinging to a box of personal items that was supposed to send me off into a new job, not out into the cold. The air was damp and cool from the bay breeze, but inside I felt nothing but a growing emptiness and panic. On the ride home to my little apartment in the Mission District, I remember looking out the Uber window at Market Street. Neon signs flickered and streetcars clanged by, but it all seemed surreal. A jazz song crooned softly from the radio as I sat back, hands on my forehead, thinking, this was supposed to be my life forever, and now what? My mind drifted to my parents back in Raleigh. They had immigrated from Lagos, Nigeria years ago, working crazy hours to give me every opportunity. They had always dreamed big for me. Doctor, lawyer, you name it. And here I was, suddenly having to phone them to say I was just a guy with a packed box and no idea what to do next. That evening I called my mom. When she answered, I could hear her humming. She was kneading dough for jollof rice while my little sister flipped through a storybook on speakerphone. Her voice was warm and steady, the same loving voice that had walked me through every childhood scrape and late-night exam stress. The moment she heard my worried hello, she sighed and said, "Ah, my son, I knew something was wrong. You sounded far away." My heart sank. I wasn't ready to tell her, but how could I lie? I told her I was just tired from a long day of work and that I missed her cooking too much. Even if I'd inhaled some fancy burrito in the food truck that afternoon, it didn't taste the same as her rice. As we talked, I could tell she was trying to read me. Finally, she said softly, "You know, life is like the weather here. It changes all the time. The rain will come and then the sun." I almost cried. My proud, stubborn mother had just given me a weather analogy, of all things. After I hung up, I sat down on my couch, and the reality sank in. I felt a knot in my stomach. How could I tell her? How could I even admit to myself that I had no idea who I was if I wasn't an engineer anymore? For so long, being a software guy in the city was the only part of me I let other people see. If I wasn't that, then what was I? A failure? A lazy dreamer? 3 days later, I found myself on a plane heading back to North Carolina. The flight was roughly 500 miles, 23 kilometers, coast to coast, basically the opposite side of the country from where I had been living. As we took off from SFO, I watched the Golden Gate Bridge disappear into the morning fog and wondered if I'd ever feel that excitement again. I was leaving behind my old life, the job, the city, my carefully arranged identity, and flying towards something unknown. Honestly, it scared me to death. Stepping off the plane in Raleigh felt surreal. One moment I was gazing at skyscrapers in San Francisco, the next I was blinking at southern sunlight and pine trees lining the highway. I grabbed my suitcase from the carousel and headed outside, where Dad was waiting in an old pickup truck. He wore his usual Guayabera shirt and a big smile, though his hair had gone entirely white now. "Daniel!" he called, hustling around to give me a big hug. He smelled like minty aftershave and barbecue smoke. "You're home," he said softly, and it felt strange to hear that word after all these years. Mom stepped out from the terminal building a second later, waving and laughing as she saw us. She wore one of her colorful headscarves and carried a paper bag of plantains, their light green skins already starting to ripen into sweetness. She had tears in her eyes. "Look at you all grown up," she said, kissing my cheeks. "But we always knew this day would come," she added, patting my shoulder with gentle strength. We laughed as I tried to juggle the plantains, a bag of her homemade snacks, and my overnight bag. In seconds, I was wearing an accidental fruit stash like a crown. Being back in their embrace, smelling coconut oil and pepper soup on Mom's clothes, felt like a warm blanket after a long winter. For a moment, I could pretend I was 10 years old and everything would turn out fine. The drive home took me through our old neighborhood. I remembered riding bikes down these streets with my sister and how my grandma's house on the corner had a wide porch and a creaky swing hanging under a giant oak tree we used to climb. By now, that old oak's trunk had got to be at least 3 feet, about 0.9 meters, across at the base. I noticed a new strip mall where the hardware store used to be. Even here, change had quietly crept in. But the red brick houses and our own yard looked the same as I remembered. When we pulled up to our house, it was late afternoon. Our home smelled exactly as I remembered it, a mix of my mother's spicy cooking and the earthiness of her garden in back. Inside, Mom fussed over me like I was 10 again. "You must be starving," she scolded playfully. Dad was back in the kitchen, flipping chicken breasts in a pan. After a big plate of food that probably had enough calories for 3 tech bros, I felt like I could take on a forklift. Dad gave me a big glass of sweet iced tea and asked if I wanted to take a walk around the property like I used to. We strolled out back into the warm evening air. There was still that old tool shed on one corner and a chicken coop Dad built that I helped paint years ago. The warm sun and the chirp of crickets made me relax more than I'd felt in months. That night, I slept in my old room. The curtains were the same shade of green I picked out when I was 12, and Dad had kept a framed photo of my college graduation on the nightstand. As I laid under the childhood quilt Mom had made, my mind replayed the last few days. The email, the packed box, the hug goodbye. The silence of my old room felt heavy, but also comforting, as if it had plenty of space for whatever came next. I realized with a strange shiver that I'd given up everything I knew to come home, and I needed to figure out who I wanted to be now. My first morning back in North Carolina, I woke up without an alarm and felt the sun already crawling through the window. I must have looked ridiculous in my old Superman pajamas with untied shoelaces. In the kitchen, Mom was already at the stove. "Good morning, sleepyhead," she said, flipping bacon in a pan. The house smelled like sweet cornmeal and spice. I poured myself a glass of fresh squeezed orange juice. Dad grew those oranges in a tree near our porch, and sat down. At the breakfast table, Dad bowed his head to pray before we ate. It was Sunday, after all. Our family tradition. Even though I didn't always go to church in San Francisco, I quietly joined in that morning. Saying amen with them felt comforting in a strange way, even if I felt a bit like a backseat passenger on these old routines. Mom had cheerfully made the meal, insisting I eat more, as if I were a growing boy at 36. I tried to stay hungry, but after 2 helpings I was stuffed. Mom laughed and said, I must be conserving energy for something. After breakfast, I offered to help with the yard work. Dad handed me an ancient, rusty lawnmower with a grin. Here, put this old relic to use, will ya? He said. Easy, I thought. How hard could mowing be? Well, as soon as I pulled the cord, the engine roared awake and jerked forward, gobbling up my flip-flop and a chunk of the flower bed. I yelped and tumbled to the ground, landing smack in the path of a sprinkler's spray. Water blasted me in the face. When I stood up sputtering, Dad was doubled over, laughing so hard he nearly fell into the grass. I had never felt so silly. Guess it wasn't meant to be, I managed to joke, wiping dirt from my jeans. Dad clapped me on the back and said, Welcome home, son. I mustered a grin. We were both relieved to see I could still laugh. Later, as I sat on the porch, nursing a bruised ego and drying off, Mom brought me another glass of sweet tea and fussed over me. You give up too easily, she scolded playfully, though I knew she was proud I tried. Next time, hold on to your shirt, I thanked her, feeling her warmth and resilience like a shield against my fears. That afternoon, feeling a bit more useful, I helped Dad fix the internet router that had apparently died while I was gone. Once I got it blinking green instead of red, Mom and Dad cheered as if I'd performed a miracle. It was a small victory, but I could see the pride in their eyes. Days went by in a slow, easy rhythm. I took evening walks around the block, watching neighbors water their lawns and dogs chase frisbees. Sometimes I stopped by the local diner for a cup of coffee. A tiny cup for 1.0.9, no fancy networks or passwords needed. I'd chat with the waitress I remembered from high school. She told me how she finally convinced her husband to start brewing coffee at home, which she laughed meant she got some peace in the mornings. It felt good to connect over small, normal things again. When Sunday came around again, Mom insisted we all go to church together. I hadn't stepped inside that old red brick building since I was a teenager, but why not? We walked up to Holy Family Methodist, the one with the stained glass windows and a weather-vane rooster on top. Inside, sunlight streamed through colorful glass onto polished wood floors. People greeted me warmly. Older ladies whispered, "Bless your heart," and hugged me. Kids shook my hand looking me over, and even Pastor Green gave me a quick nod from the pulpit. The pastor's sermon was about planting seeds and trusting them to grow in their own time. He spoke of seasons changing, how what seems barren can bloom again. I closed my eyes briefly, hearing phrases that felt like they were meant for me. Change, renewal, growth, hope. Vague or not, it was as if someone was whispering, "It's going to be okay." Walking back from church, I thought about what he said. Maybe change was just part of life, and maybe it was okay not to have the answers right now. On the way home, I stopped by the community center and glanced at the wooden bulletin board. A bright flyer with photos of tomatoes and carrots caught my eye. In big letters, it read, Oak Grove Community Garden. Volunteers needed. Come grow with us. I stared at it for a while, a slow smile creeping up on my face. Something about that faded sign felt hopeful. It made me wonder if this might just be the surprise my life needed. The next morning, I woke up before dawn feeling a strange sort of excitement. The same jitters I used to get before launching a new project, except now it was for something completely different. After a quick bowl of oatmeal, I grabbed my phone. Mom had found a corner of the house with just enough Wi-Fi and took a deep breath before calling the number on the flyer. A kind voice answered, and soon I was introducing myself in person. Me, Daniel, the guy with no gardening experience to speak of, looking to volunteer. They just laughed and said, "Great. Come on down." That afternoon, I showed up at Oak Grove Community Garden. Stepping inside was like entering another world. Rows of wooden beds brimmed with green plants, tall sunflowers easily 9 feet, about 2.7 meters, high, tomato vines heavy with red fruit, green bean poles sprouting up like tiny flags. A few other volunteers were already there as the sun rose, tucking in the young plants or sipping coffee by the compost heap. A smiling woman approached and said, "You must be Daniel, right?" She introduced herself as Harriet, a retired teacher, and handed me a pair of gardening gloves. My heart pounded a bit as I introduced myself and tried to steady my hands. Harriet gave me some simple instructions to start with. A pair of old vine trimmings needed chopping up. With the sun on my neck and dirt under my nails, I got to work. At first, it felt weird, almost too quiet without the constant buzz of notifications. But the snapping of a vine stem under the shears and the distant song of morning birds started to sink in. I realized I had just left city sidewalks to be knee-deep in real soil and real life. By late morning, I was on tomato duty. Harriet taught me how to tie the vines up so they wouldn't break in the wind. I plucked a tiny green tomato and popped it into my mouth, warm and tangy, and had to resist the urge to call it a feast. We laughed together about how little I knew about this stuff. "Almost forgot how things grow without a screen," I said, wiping juice from my chin with a laugh. Every now and then, other volunteers strolled by to say hi. There was Marcus, a local barista who loved botany on the side, and May, a college student majoring in biology. Everyone had a story about why they were here, and they welcomed me like a neighbor. I learned that Michael had left finance to manage our compost pile, and Casey, a biology major, was a whiz at spotting weeds I'd never have noticed. Harriet, of course, still showed up every week with news. She told me she once read about a fellow programmer named Bill Bass who left Silicon Valley to become an organic farmer, and he said it was the best decision of his life. Her story made me feel like I might be on to something good. After a few hours of digging, planting, and occasional swearing at stubborn roots, we gathered around a picnic table piled high with garden vegetables. Cucumbers, radishes, and big loaves of zucchini bread. I grabbed a tall glass of water and joined the circle. They asked me about life in Silicon Valley. Someone joked, "So can you program the weather here, too?" And I found myself telling stories about my parents' yard, my first failed programming experiment, and how lost I felt. They listened and nodded as if they understood exactly where I was coming from. We all ate together under the sun, and for the first time in ages, I felt content. Walking home that afternoon with pockets full of fresh carrots and a daikon radish, I felt something shift. I hadn't glanced at a screen or checked an email all day. Instead, I'd spent hours meeting people, digging in the dirt, and actually feeling useful. The weight of the world was strangely lighter. As I shelved the carrots in the fridge that evening, a grin spread across my face. Change was messy and exhausting, but it also felt kind of wonderful. Weeks went by, and I found myself at the garden almost every other morning. The more I helped, the more connections I felt forming. I learned that great things often start small. Take one humid Saturday. We harvested nearly 50 pounds, about 23 kilograms of vegetables. Kids from the neighborhood packed bags and smiled as if it were Christmas morning. One dad even handed me a pumpkin easily, 15 pounds, about 6.8 kilograms, and joked, "I must have strong arms by now." We all laughed together at the sight of him holding that massive orange orb. The routine became comforting. I arrived with rubber boots on and fresh fear in my chest, then left muddy but fulfilled. A few familiar faces kept me company. Michael, who had left finance to manage our compost, and Casey, a biology student who was a whiz at spotting weeds, and Harriet, of course, who always showed up with stories about others who changed paths. She reminded me of that programmer named Bill Bass, who became an organic farmer. If he could find happiness there, she'd say, maybe you can too. Her optimism was contagious. I even used a little tech on the side. I started a Google spreadsheet to track water needs for each bed, which was nerdy but useful, and I set up a small blog for our community garden to share recipes and tips. It felt odd and perfect at the same time, merging my old world with this new one. One bright afternoon, I invited Mom and Dad to join me at the garden. Dad wheeled a barrow full of soil, while Mom helped plant a row of basil, which she had used in recipes since my childhood. We all laughed when a bee buzzed by and startled Dad. That day, as we watered the basil together, Dad said softly, "You always did love working with your hands." He was right. I had spent my life building things, Lego sets with him, fixing our old car engine in high school, even coding programs that felt creative. And it was all creation, one way or another. Being here, doing this with my hands and heart, felt like I was finally making something real again. That night I fell asleep with images of seedlings in my mind. Even without a flashy title, I was still Daniel, the guy who helped revive a community garden and bring life back to this land. And in doing so, I felt some life coming back to me too. Then one morning, I got an email I never expected. It was from my old manager back in San Francisco. They had a new project and needed someone with my exact experience. They wanted me back on a team and were even dangling a decent salary. My fingers hovered over the screen. Heat rushed to my face as I suddenly remembered who I used to be. I had spent 4 years building my life as that guy, the coder in the city. Was I ready to become him again? I didn't reply immediately. The next day, I found myself flying back to San Francisco for an informal meeting. My heart pounded as the plane descended. Back in that city, everything felt hyper bright and hyper fast. The office tower I used to work in looked the same, sleek and towering. I hardly recognized myself in the glass as I walked in. In the conference room, my former manager smiled and said, "Welcome home, Danny." His voice was warm, but it hit me strangely. Home? I took a breath and smiled back as he introduced me to the new team. We talked shop, artificial intelligence and farming technology, and yes, it felt exciting to talk about code and ideas again. They showed me wireframes for an app that would help people start community gardens with the push of a button. How's that for a coincidence? When we finished, they shook my hand and said they'd love to have me on board. I thanked them and told them I needed a few days to think. I left the building feeling like I'd swallowed my old life whole for a moment. On the drive back to the airport, I stared out the window at the Bay Bridge and the Golden Gate Bridge in the distance. This city had once felt like destiny to me, but now it looked different. If I took this offer, would I be turning my back on what I'd found back home? Back in North Carolina that evening, I paced around the porch wrestling with the decision, aching from the trip, but with my mind wide awake. I called Mom. She listened as I hesitated on what to say. Finally, I told her everything. I told her I felt torn, honored by the offer, but unwilling to leave again. She listened and then sighed. Life does give strange choices, son. Just promise me you'll do what makes you happiest." Her words were gentle. I knew she meant it. That night, sleep didn't come easily. I dreamed of code and seedlings tangled together, my two worlds colliding in surreal loops. I tossed and turned, staring at the ceiling fan. Who was I now, if not the proud tech guy I had been? Could I go back after finding something different? The fear of starting over pressed heavy in my chest. I didn't have an answer yet, but I knew I had a big decision to make. By the following week, my answer was clear. I typed a brief email to my former manager, thanking him for the offer but explaining that I'd found something important here. Sending it felt like finally exhaling after holding my breath. The next day at the garden, I stepped in with a new lightness in my step. I told Harriet and some of the others about my decision. "I'm staying," I said simply. And just like that, the last of my fear began to melt away. I realized I didn't have to be anybody else. I could just be Daniel, plain and simple. From then on, I embraced whatever came. I helped plan a community harvest event and even gave an impromptu speech to thank everyone for making the garden possible. My voice shook a little when I spoke, but the smile was real. All those people who once clapped for me at a podium in San Francisco, here they were again applauding as I stood up at a picnic table under the open sky. Looking at their faces, I knew I'd made the right choice. I still had butterflies about the future, but now they felt more like excitement than fear. The identity I'd spent years building had shifted, and that was okay. I discovered I could be the tech guy who plants pumpkins, or just a guy who tries his best at whatever life throws at him. Both were true. So yes, I had started over, but I had also started anew. I grew into this new version of myself bit by bit. And here I was, planting true roots, realizing that embracing change wasn't giving up, it was gaining a whole new plot to call home. These days, I tend the garden before dawn and listen to morning birds sing. I'm home in a way I never expected I could be. The road has taken strange turns, but it has led me somewhere good, to a place where my heart feels at peace. It's funny. For so long, I chased prestige and status, only to find meaning here, where the rewards are simple and real. A sunflower blooming on a chilly morning feels like a small triumph now, every bit as thrilling as a sold-out tech product once was. I guess it took losing my old identity to find this new one, and you know what? I don't miss the old life the way I thought I would. I don't need to explain to anyone why I make pizza topped with garden tomatoes instead of coding apps for smartphones. This life is enough. Plenty of others come by the garden and tell me their stories. A young man who quit his law firm to open a bakery, a retired teacher painting murals. Everyone has a new path to embrace. If there's one thing to remember, it's that change doesn't erase who you are. It can mean you're just becoming someone new. So, as I watch my vegetables catch the last of the sunset, I feel grateful. Grateful for the city that made me who I was, and grateful for this garden that taught me who I can be. Everything has changed. My clothes, my routine, even how I greet the day, but I'm more me now than ever. I stood in the rain and the sunshine, got dirty, and I found myself again. Thanks for sticking with me through this story of change. Please like, share, and subscribe to support the channel.